It
Good
all
morning, Earth.
lies
This is Adam
in the
Sturch
plan
podcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico,
that
working on oil
our
painting sundial.
peculiar
Alright,
restlessness,
yesterday I
which
played with these upper
in
leaves a
modern
little bit, mixed up a
circumstances has
different light
evolved
blue,
into a
and
rapacious
just continued
appetite for addictive
increasing the
substances
density
all
of
sorts.
these little light
Our
leaves.
peculiar
And that's starting to come along okay. I think I'd like to do a few more layers of smaller, brighter, lighter leaves.
Complex mammals.
But for the
We are
moment, I'm going to take the
certainly
same
not
light blue.
angels,
Let's see if I can
and
find an
we
example of
just
it.
seem
I
to
think
occupy
this
a
one
very
was that light
uncomfortable
blue right
place
there.
in the hierarchy of
And I'm going to start
creation.
radiating cool
I think
colors
this has to do with the
from
fact
the
that
center
we are,
of the sundial,
the
near where his feet
traumatized
are.
inheritors
And as it
of
moves
a
further to the edge,
dysfunctional
increasing the warmth of the spectrum,
a relationship
maybe
that grew
ending it with a
dysfunctional,
goldish red
in the
circle
last
around the edge.
15 to 25,000 years.
But for the moment, I'm
And
just
what
going
we
to take it
call
into
history
here
is the
and start with that light
fall
blue.
out of a dynamic here and now feeling toned relationship with our environment
That's sufficient.
and into this anticipation of the future, worry about the past, basically ego. And I recently spoke in New York, and New York is a very nuts and bolts kind of town. And people there took issue with the notion that all of our problems can be boiled down to a single problem. If you trace the thread of every screw-up back into the maze, it all comes back to a single issue, which is excess of ego. We all have excess of ego, and our entire situation, legalistic, psychological, religious, everything is about this, that it doesn't work. It's maladaptive, and yet we have it. And why do we have it? If it's maladaptive, if it doesn't promote human values, then how in the hell did it get started, and what is it that's maintaining and sustaining it? Well, this is what I want to talk about over the course of the weekend. When I pushed the analysis of what the psychedelic experience meant to the limits, I was surprised to discover that it left the domain of my personal relationship to the mystery. What is it? What does it want from me? What is it trying to say? All that had to also make room for another issue, which is there's a political issue here. I think most people in this room, most people who have had a psychedelic experience will agree that the most profound, the most open-hearted, the most moving moments of their lives, some of them have been tied in with those experiences. But we seem unable or unwilling or afraid to extrapolate that conclusion to the notion that this is a general panacea for society, because we cannot conceive that that the solution to a spiritual dilemma could lie in matter. In other words, we ourselves have been infected by the inside-outside matter-spirit dichotomies of the dominator culture. But the notion that man, notice the gender thrust here, the notion that man could somehow bootstrap himself to Godhead without reference to nature seems to me highly peculiar, and simply nothing more than an expression of hubris, pride, a belief, that we can do it our way and alone. So all of this is very, the shelf life is short on all of these issues, because the planet is in a state of terminal crisis. Does that have anything to do with the psychedelic experience? Or are these separate issues? How can they be separate issues if the psychedelic experience is a mirror of the state of the individual and collective psyche, and if the planet is on a collision course with some kind of terminal crisis? It seems to me then that nature is struggling to right this disequilibrated planetary ecosystem. So in a sense, there is nothing to be done except to watch and wait. But on the other hand, we are not apart from nature. We are, in some sense, a portion of nature which is the most reactive and energetic, because we are reactive and energetic in the domain of epigenetic codes. We can foment rapid change. Until recently, it was a truism of thinking about society that all change had to be gradual. This myth has now been exploded. We know that, you just take them all out and hang them, and then that's not gradual, and then you've got a new world. And this has been done in several places with excellent success recently. So change need not be gradual. And in fact, I think we're entering into a historical domain where very little change will be gradual. Gradual change was a luxury of the past. Well, how to come to terms with these processes, patterns, forming and reforming in our lives, in our relationships, in our families, in our businesses, in the extended relationships we have with people. It's what is needed, you see, is a kind of collective breakthrough in apperception. I was thinking in the hot tub today, the most politically potent thing you can do for somebody is to educate them, to give them the facts. The facts are now so horrifying, and the means of delivering the facts so effective that there is no excuse for everyone not beginning to act in an informed manner. And I think this is happening. For instance, a few months ago I was in Belize, which is an extremely poor country, a little chip of land in the armpit of the Yucatan that used to be British Honduras. I didn't know there were countries this funky in the Western Hemisphere. I thought you had to go, They have the fortune, good or ill, of speaking English as a national language. So when the British left, they just simply pointed dishes to the sky, and they get 270 channels of American television. It has completely educated the entire population of the country into an extremely sophisticated strategy for surviving in the real world of the present moment. They understand that their only resource is their nature. So they have made the entire country into a nature reserve. They understand that tourism is their only hope, and that for tourism to work, they must halt the destruction of their environment. This informing people at distant points of the value systems operating at the centers where values are being created allows people to position themselves for success. I mean, a lot is being lost. You cannot pretend that the situation we're in is unambiguously rosy. It isn't. It's extremely complicated. Marxism dissolves. What does this mean? It means that now 21 language groups and 16 tribal groups are open to exploitation, homogenization, leveling of cultural values. Everybody will be turned into a kind of white bread consuming citizen in a beige fascist world. And this is the alternative to Armageddon. We hail this as a great step forward. What is happening is that all restrictions are being done away with against the expression of completely rapacious drives for immediate self-gratification. Until 18 months ago, only half the world had permission to behave like assholes. Now this permission is being extended to everyone as quickly as possible as a right, your right to join in the looting of the planet. Well, certainly Stalinism is a bad thing, but is the only ideological counterpoise to that to be high-tech, mindless consumer fascism? I don't think so. In fact, I know not, because there isn't enough metal in the planet to put a Volvo in every driveway of 3.5 billion or 4 billion people. So the search for a serious revolution in values is on. It cannot, it must come from the spiritual realm. And the spiritual realm, in practical terms, means the imagination. The frontier of our species is the imagination. Now we have to take that slogan and somehow turn it into a technology. How can we go to the place where ideas come from? How can we somehow separate our architectonic fantasies from the ongoing momentum of the planet? Both are valid, you see, but we have to recognize that what we are is almost an ontological transformation of life. We are to life what life is to the inorganic realm, and we need to separate ourselves from the planet. The planet, the entire planet, should be a bioreserve. How many of these oxygen-rich, water-heavy worlds are there? Now, of course, it's pie in the sky to talk about moving all heavy industry into space or to the asteroid belt or something like that. But on the other hand, when you extrapolate a visionless future, even as much as 3 or 4 decades into the future, you see the accumulation of problems on such a scale that then there will be no pulling out of the power dive. Because once a society passes a certain point in the process of dissolution, you just don't make a decision to change. I mean, it's too late. You don't have the engineering skills, you don't have the technical community, you don't have the resource extraction ability. It's all slipped through your fingers. Well, I think psychedelics are catalysts to thought, to imagination, to understanding. And we are like somebody who has been dead drunk while the house was burning down around us. And now we have awakened to the sound of falling timbers and the smell of smoke. And we have a certain limited amount of time to figure this situation out. We don't have 500 years or 100 years. Anybody who speaks in terms of solutions that require 100 years or even 50 years to implement doesn't understand the dynamics of the situation. History has some kind of will for its own transcendence, and I think we are now so close to the dropping of the mask and the realization of what the game was all along, that the sense of this nearby revelation informs all of our lives. I mean, drives our dreams, our thoughts, the choices we make, why we're here in this room this evening. It's very big news, I think. The world is not at all as we suppose it to be. I find that very amazing. I mean, that's the bottom line for me. I always think of these things in reference to that scene in 2001 when the anthropoid apes are leaping up and down and screaming and pointing at the monolith. That's what we're doing here in this room. I mean, the subject of this weekend is unspeakable. You know, it can only be obliquely indicated. Whatever you say about it is not true. and yet it is somehow the informing mystery of being, and it is not remote. That's the big news. That the previous human model, which is that we are all poor, groveling sinners, and that gnosis will trickle down to us from the wonderful folks up on top of the steep building nearby where they're conducting mysterious business with liver readings and stargazing. That model is insufficient and insulting, considering the situation we have been brought to by those very stargazing men wearing dresses. So I think what we have to do now is just take the machinery into our own hands. It's a matter of personal responsibility to find out what the world is really doing, what it is. What do you think's going on? What do you think this is all about? Who do you think you are? What do you think English is? How do you really cognize notions like the future, the past, where I've been, what I want? I mean, you know, it's in Moby Dick, Melville says, if you would strike through the mask. Everything is a mask. And just behind that mask lurks, well, what? That's the question. I mean, it's the thing which informs every individual existence, and that's fine, and people have always lived in the shadow of that mystery. But it is our weird privilege to live in an age where there is also to be a collective dropping of the mask, a moment of melting and recasting of what reality itself is to be. So, you know, discussing this, convincing ourselves of it, and then working out the minute details of how it all is inevitable and couldn't be any other way is how we will occupy ourselves.
All right, that's a pretty even dispersal of that blue. We still have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to do a little bit of detailing on Central Figure here, who's been pretty neglected throughout the rest of this process.
Correctly
Kind of got him set in there and left him. Let's see if I can get some shadows into that.
I think of myself as a reasonable person, a person sensitive to concepts like evidence, causality, so forth and so on. And yet, what I have to say is like completely unreasonable. I mean, a messenger bearing news of complete madness approaching from all directions. So, and I got into that position by staying pretty close to the principle of skepticism. I'm not a believer. In fact, when the aliens draped the mantle over my shoulders, they said, it's because you don't believe in anything. You know, this is why you that's why you got this far, because you didn't believe in anything. And it's a good method. Normally, it's a method spawned out of futility. You say, well, fuck it, I don't believe in anything. But it's also very good for getting rid of a lot of crap, because the real stuff can take the test of skepticism. The real stuff doesn't have to be bowed down before, and, you know, it works, it's on its own. The news is, and it's very hard news to get out, because it's news about the structure of reality. The news is coming back from, 50, 60, 100 years of anthropologists, ethnographers, geographers, botanists, dealing with the most quote-unquote primitive people in the most remote parts of the world. The news is that reality is not at all as we imagined it to be, and that our prowess in the technical sciences is simply a cultural artifact, an accomplishment of ours. Some people do great tattoos. We send spacecraft to the stars. But it doesn't mean we understand anymore. And in fact, the evidence is building that our style of society is the historical equivalent of a temper tantrum. You know, that it has no viability. It's completely self-limiting. It's destructive. And it hands nothing on to its receivers. So I sort of talk to this group, and all the groups that I talk to, from 2 points of view. I'm trying to convince you of something, and yet reason dictates that I assume that you're already convinced, pretty much. So then it's also an effort to figure out what it is we're so convinced of, and then what is so great about it. Because I think some kind of this is a real mystery, the only one I know. This is the thing that you hope exists and assume doesn't if you're a reasonable person. Because it's that, you know, all the dreams of childhood, all the sense of magic and the dissolvability and transcendability of boundaries is returned, is affirmed in this experience. Well, yet here we are having this on the brink of a planetary meltdown of culture and ecosystem. So is this just some kind of dancing on the brink? Is it kind of ultimate self-indulgence? Does it feed back into the central moral problem of the age, which is, what is to be done? What are we to do? How can we be effective, whatever that means? Is there a discernible role for each of us to play in the metamorphosis and near death of the planet that we are now experiencing? Or are we simply to witness it? Well, I don't think there's any point in thinking about these kinds of questions unless you draw back to the big picture, to first premises. A good example of what I mean is, suppose we save the rainforests and stabilize the population and so forth and so on, and then 50 years down the line, the sun explodes. It means we didn't get it. We were not reading correctly the message nature was trying to hand to us. And so we did the wrong thing and are going to be blown out of the water for such churlishness. So what's important is to figure out what is going on before you start pushing in the process. And I don't think you can do it from within a culture. In other words, if you're a person of decent intent and moderate intelligence, and you read the great minds of your culture and study their thought, it's insufficient because everybody is bound within an illusion of language. The entire enterprise of culture is this illusion of language. Homer was as sick with it as Heidegger. So there's no going back or getting, no classic recension. What we have to do is reach past to some kind of experience. It must be anchored in an experience. But there is this thing about being human, which we as a culture have ignored, repressed, don't want to talk about, face, or think about, which is you can get loaded. And nobody knows quite what to make of this. We dance around it with the same kind of furious, ambiguous intensity that we also reserve for sex, which is also a boundary dissolving, momentary loss of self into some kind of greater whole. And it also just drives us into a frenzy. We establish boundaries, we have hierarchies, we push it this way and that. It just drives us up the wall. whoever she was who designed this system had the good sense to connect this whole sexual impulse very tightly into the generative process, so that there's no way you can get sex out of the human experience. I mean, people have tried in all times and places in many strange ways. 150 years ago, they were putting pants on pianos because it was thought that young men should not see pianos unclothed because it might excite them to impure thoughts. And this is real. In England, in our culture, not New Guinea or the moon, but in England, pianos wore pants. But the psychedelic option is sort of like an appendix. You can have it, but you don't need it, apparently. Apparently. That's the key thing. In other words, whether or not you have the psychedelic experience does not stand between you and the ability to pass on your genes into time. It does not stand between you and continued existence like the autonomic reflex of breathing. It's a kind of potential loop in development, which we can, as culturally coordinated creatures, choose to follow or choose not to follow. But this development is very recent. Until, pick a number, 10,000 years ago, the onset of puberty, which was, a wave of hormonal release, basically, the onset of puberty was the signal to the social mechanisms of the people to begin the administration of psychedelic plants, to carry people into adulthood, to carry them into
All right, still got a minute left. Nice. So that gets the face a little shadowed, a little more carved out, as well as the arms. Still got some work to do on that, though. But that helps a little bit. I had to stand in front of the camera, sorry, to get the eye dots lined up correctly. So it's getting a little more personality now. But that's it for the moment. That's Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting sundial. Thank you for watching and have a good afternoon.
We have interfered with this